see you.
How are you, Senator?
Good. Can I go maskless or masked? What do you recommend?
Up to you. I'm comfortable either way. So, you were at the border this weekend. Can you tell us a little bit about what were some of the more striking things you saw and what steps you think kind of need to happen as we move forward there?
Yeah, I was down at the border, riding with the Border Patrol, but also joining Secretary Mayorkas and looking at detention facilities. And, it's chaotic. It's certainly a crisis by any measure. There are more unaccompanied kids coming across the border now and in U.S. custody than there were back in the crisis of 2014 that everyone called a crisis, or the crisis in 2019. So it's really discouraging. 100,000 unlawful entries last month, which is the most in 15 years. And, it's a result of the administration choosing to change all the Trump-era policies. Most on day one. They issued 5 executive orders on day one. But then over time they changed others and not putting anything in their place. So they have the right to do that, but I think it's not responsible to get rid of what was working to keep people from coming over and not to put something else in its place. Or at a minimum, to be able to know that there was going to be a surge because of that, to be prepared for the surge. And they weren't, and they aren't. And as a result, these detention facilities are overcrowded. Kids are not being tested for COVID. They're living inches apart, not 6 feet apart. And by, again, every measure, this is getting worse, not better. So tonight on the floor, I gave 6 specific suggestions of policy. To me, this is not a political issue. We should not be just talking about who's right and who's wrong. We should talk about how do we find a solution to deal with this issue. The Border Patrol are overwhelmed. Our immigration system is overwhelmed. These kids are in a tough situation. It's not good for them to be crammed into these facilities without COVID testing and with an uncertain future. So I propose that we go to a different system where we actually have immediate adjudications of asylum claims, because these kids are claiming asylum at the border, so we don't have to hold them a long time. Right now, there's a 1.2 million backlog in asylum cases. You won't hear your case won't be heard for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, we're told. People are being released into communities in the interior. Only 15% of these individuals, once they go through the asylum process, are being granted asylum because their credible fear claim is that standard is not met. So it's a bad system right now. Much better to adjudicate it quickly on the border, use due process, and then make a decision one way or the other. And in the meantime, give the Border Patrol what they need in terms of tools to be able to deal with this. They're caught in the middle. And ensure that more people stay home and seek asylum from their home country. We can do that through various programs, including one the Biden administration does support, Central American Minors Program, which I support. I applaud them for that. But that's a small program. We need to do that in a much larger scale to try to deal with this surge of people. And my hope is that, again, we can work on a bipartisan basis to come up with some solutions here.
Secretary Mayorkas seemed to project on some of the Sunday issues this weekend that the Biden administration has a plan, but just needs time to get that plan up and moving. So it's kind of a two-pronged question, but how familiar are you with what that plan is they're projecting, and how much time do you think is an appropriate amount of time to get moving on this?
Well, the problem is they dismantled the old plan without putting a new plan in place. And so every day that goes by, more and more people are coming over the border, and it's getting worse, not better. So time is working against us. This is why I again made some suggestions, short-term, mid-term, long-term, to act immediately to deal with this issue. I don't know what the plan is. They haven't shared it with us. He was with us at the border. I appreciated him coming. I think he's trying to do the right thing, but frankly, I think the administration put him in a very tough position as well by moving on day one, to change all these policies without putting something better in place. And in the meantime, they've done several other things that have made it worse. And so I wish that we had an opportunity for a pause here, but that's not how the world works. These migrants are hearing from the administration deportations are stopped for 100 days. There is a policy that says you don't have to remain in Mexico anymore to get your asylum claim. There's a policy now that says under the COVID-19 safeguards, where we were keeping people out, that is no longer applying to children at all, and not applying to many families. So smugglers have this information. They're able to go to these migrants and say, look, they're opening up, and they are, and so people are flooding the border. The administration also chose on day one to say, therefore, amnesty, which is their right. That's a policy issue. But they should have focused on the fact that you have to be here first to get amnesty. You have to have already been in the United States, because a lot of people are misreading that, and frankly, the smugglers are using that in a misleading way to say, hey, just go and you can get amnesty. That's not how the policy, I hope, will ever work if we do pass one. And we got to increase our enforcement. We've got to be sure that we're helping our Border Patrol and our other immigration officials be able to deal with the surge.
You were with some of your Democratic colleagues this weekend, and I'm curious about conversations with them, not just them, like the two specific leaders, but Democrats generally, have looked like. Do you see a path forward? I know you said you're hopeful this can be done in a bipartisan way, but what does that really look like? Where are areas?
I'm talking to my Democratic colleagues. I think there is a way forward. Again, I laid out 6 ideas tonight. I said I'm open to many others, and it was my idea to go down to the border. I initiated the trip, and I insisted that it be bipartisan. And I think it was important. Secretary Mayorkas asked us if he could join us. We said, of course, but it was going to be a bipartisan trip anyway. 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, the chair and ranking member of Homeland Security, the chair and ranking member of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. And so my hope is that we can come together on something.
Can you describe maybe one of the most striking visuals you saw over the summer?
Well, the tough thing is you go in these detention centers and you have kids, 100 kids in one room, a large room, but 100 kids in one room, inches apart, not 6 feet apart. None have been tested for COVID. They're living on mattresses that are this thin, foam pads, really. The only cover they have is a space blanket. And it's tough. And your heart goes out to them. And honestly, it's not a humane policy for them. People say, well, what the Trump administration did was not humanitarian. It was keeping people from coming over. Is it a humanitarian policy to have these kids take that arduous journey north, where unfortunately many are abused along the way, and then to end up in these kind of facilities? Now, eventually, they will be sent out to sponsors. But even then, I have a deep concern, because I've worked on this issue for several years because of a terrible incident that happened in Ohio, where the kids were placed with a criminal, with smugglers, the same smugglers that brought them up to the country, turned them over to the Border Patrol, then to HHS. HHS then gave these kids back to the traffickers, and they abused the kids. They sent them to an egg farm in Ohio, worked them 12 hours a day for little or no pay, living in squalid conditions. These are teenagers. So I've seen the worst of this, and I don't want to repeat that. So my hope is we can put sensible policies in place so there is a legal and appropriate, orderly immigration process. And that's what we all should want.